dude, it's funny. Like every time you do things, your wife comes in off the side and she's like bringing you stuff, and I'm like, what the heck is Randy getting delivered? Uh, you talked about lunch. What she bring you?
Oh, Firehouse subs. She brought me a Firehouse sub. We had it's teacher appreciation this week. So we
That's right.
got the teachers lunch. And so, if you're getting them lunch, she just picked me up lunch. I didn't think she was getting me lunch, but yeah, so I have a Firehouse sub sitting here for me when we finish recording today.
Nice.
Yeah. It's
I
good
hadn't
times.
had Firehouse in a minute, but my older son, it's funny. He'll just like bring stuff up sometimes. He's like, so my older son, he's 13. He's super active, so he gets hungry like crazy hungry sometimes, and then he'll be like, all of a sudden, can we get Firehouse subs? Can we get Panda Express? I'm like, oh my gosh, this dude,
Yeah.
big appetite. But I just thought that was interesting. It's funny, like I don't know how you if you arrange it like that on purpose, but every time we have a meeting or something, you're getting a
No,
delivery.
man. It's just that I'm really spoiled. Like, I mean, just a shout out to Steph. We don't talk about her a lot on the podcast, but like, I come up to my desk, you know, at 9ish in the morning and start to like get into my groove. And I bring my coffee up here. And then I usually don't like go downstairs again until the end of the day. And Steph will come up at various points in the day and like, bring snacks and she'll bring lunch or, I mean, you remember from our days working together, like tacos were a constant,
Yeah.
or just like another cup of coffee or if she has time, she'll bring those things in to make sure that I'm taken care of. And otherwise, I'll just sit up here and like stare at my code editor and uh, until like
Yeah.
my eyes cross. And so, yeah, I mean, that's really like it's not like planned that like every meeting or every time you and I are on a call, Steph is bringing in food.
We used to
Um,
get tacos all the time, and I'm like, dang, is it Taco Tuesday again?
yeah, I mean, every day is Taco Tuesday around here. We do.
Yeah.
I mean, we. I don't know if you've done it. Just HEB now sells like a barbacoa kit. Their barbacoa is pretty good, and so you can just have barbacoa and avocado, warm tortilla.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the stuff. We do
We
that quite a bit as
we
well.
won't get into like my favorite um barbacoa restaurant in San Antonio, but I think I mentioned it to you before. But when you talked about like your wife, you're spoiled. Um, she's bringing you stuff all the time, right? You're supported, and I think what it kind of really goes along with unintentionally. It goes along with like what we were going to talk about today, which is like flow state, ebb and flow.
Yeah,
She's supporting you in that, right? Like if you're working, it's difficult to break from that and to go and do, eat, to even just like make lunch. There's times where I won't break away, and my wife
yeah,
too. She'll just kind of bring me something. She'll realize that I'm busy or I'm like really focused on something, and all of a sudden I'll have like this Starbucks lemonade refresher tea, right? And that's really
yeah.
cool because she's supporting that flow. But I've noticed that recently. Like I just got to call that out. Like I don't know how many PRs or how many merge requests you've had this week, but man, it's really encouraging.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have been in a bit of a flow state lately, just cranking through a little bit of everything. I mean, email, more platform changes coming, trying to sort of like secretly prepare us for a platform upgrade. Of course, we went through like a major like infrastructure upgrade just recently, and then of course working on some auth changes as well. Yeah, and so like I mean definitely in a flow state. It's been facilitated quite a bit by the fact that like one, we have real clear vision, which you've been outlining for us. We haven't really talked about that on the podcast, like how our roles are kind of shifting, but you've been outlining a pretty clear vision for us and what we need to be doing. So that's been really helpful. But also the fact that like I'll post a PR and it'll just like 7 minutes later, it's all okay, you're good to go, or it's merging before by the time I come back to my desk or something, or so those things are really, really like helpful to keep things moving because I think part of it is that like once we've talked about this before on the podcast, but you get a small win and it's like a domino and you knock it down and then you knock it down and you knock it down. And like when the feedback cycles are tight, like it just gets so easy to just do the next one and do the next one and do the next one.
Yeah, you mentioned like the feedback cycles. I'm not going to ask you what it's like at your work, right, where you're working now. But I think we've both seen in the past where you'll work on something, you feel really good about it, right? Like here's this problem, I'm interested in the problem. I've got this really nice solution that I'm really proud of. You get it all the way, you get into the, GitLab or GitHub, and you've got this pull request out there, and you're like, awesome, I'm so ready to share what I've worked on with the team.
Hmm.
And of course, you talk with the team, through like stand-ups. And so us, we meet once every week on Wednesday. And so we're constantly, and I think that works for us.
Yeah.
We do talk throughout the week, like asynchronously, but we do have a standing meeting every Wednesday, and we kind of cover what we did the last week and what we hope to accomplish the next week. And I think that works absolutely perfect for us. And then throughout the week, there's like merge requests and things like that get submitted based off of what we're working on.
Hmm.
And we've worked it with places in the past to where everybody knows what you're working on. You get to the pull request, and then it sits there. It basically dies, right? It's like
Yeah.
you took it to the cemetery to die, or you took it to the hospital. It's all limped in there or whatever, and it's like sick, and nobody wants to look at it. Nobody wants to touch it after a while, and it can last a really long time. I've seen PRs out there for like, well, there's some PRs that have been like months old and they're just sitting. They
Hmm.
got cobwebs on them, at like in GitHub and other
And they're not
places
like
that I've worked
Halloween
at.
decorations.
Right. And you have these code, right? These changes that you want to get into production, right? You want to contribute to the world. And then you get some feedback, and sometimes the feedback is demoralizing, sometimes it's uplifting. Um, but ultimately, like it halts the progress. Um,
Yeah, this is such a challenging aspect of our industry. Something that I have just been thinking about a ton. And like code review is hard. Like I just want to acknowledge that to start with. And like it's hard not only because like it's a second person that doesn't have visibility into like the line by line changes in most cases, but it's also hard because by like requirement, it happens at the end, right? It's not continuous code review. Like we talk a lot about like continuous feedback, continuous, but like code review happens at the end. And so a lot of times like what you're saying is like, and then stuff doesn't get accepted and it can like deflate the balloon, it can slow down timelines. And like you don't want to say like don't review the code, but like I really do believe that the goal of code review should really be about mutual understanding of changes that are going into production, and that the point of the review is to make sure we all understand what the implications of these changes are, and less on like change that variable name and stuff like that, because like one, we have an opportunity to continuously improve things, and two, like you said, like it's the end, and like somebody has worked on this, and if we had strong opinions on it, we probably shouldn't have been involved at the end.
right.
We should have been more involved along the way. Like that's a great opportunity for like, you're a master of like implementing pair and mob programming and to like organizations. And like, if we're really strongly opinionated on how something it looks and what it looks like, we should just be doing that.
Yeah. Ultimately, like I think about flow state, because that's what's important here. I think that's what I wanted to talk about today was flow state. We'll forget about everything that happens elsewhere, and we'll talk about the way that we're operating,
Yeah.
because I'm happy with it where we are today. And I'll be honest, it was not always like that. I think like 6 months ago, a year ago, we were probably more like we were still stuck in our ways from the things that we learned at organizations, right? Organizations that had, strict boundaries, things like that. But when you're building something yourself, you can make the rules. You can break the rules. You can say there are no rules. We do what we want, and that's where we are today. And I would encourage anybody to get there as quick as you can, because it makes a difference. So right now, if we look at the way that this last week has played out, you've probably had, I don't know, 10 to 15 merge requests that didn't sit out there longer than an hour, I hope.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because if I let them sit out there for longer than an hour, then I'm doing you a disservice. I'm breaking your flow state essentially, right? You're waiting. Usually PRs are or code is built on top of other code, meaning that this one change has to happen before I can push the next change, right? The next change is dependent on the previous change. And we're seeing that a lot with the auth stuff that you're doing. And if I hold you up, then I break your flow state. And uh, in the in the scope of the work that you're in, or the work that you're doing, I don't really need to go in there and look at it and pick it apart. It's the reason for me looking at it today is simply for visibility, so I can understand the work that you're doing, the world that we're building together. Um, I'll approve it anyway, even though it's not required at this point, right? It's a good habit to get into, is to have an
Mhm.
approval. But at the same time, our goal is to just build stuff. We can always pivot. And here's why it's important, or here's why I say that we can just build stuff and move quick and then fix it later, is because we're being very intentional, or at least I hope we're being very intentional about not building ourselves or backing ourselves into a corner.
Right.
We've seen this with other code at other organizations. They'll tightly couple to one implementation or one integration, and you're stuck. And
Yeah.
to pivot off of that thing, oh my gosh, it takes a massive refactor. We're talking about months. There's lots of design. It's almost not even worth it at that point. But you've talked about this before, right? Is designing for change
Yeah.
and planning for change. If we design for change, if we plan for change, because we know it's in our future, like we already know this, we've been writing code long enough that change is inevitable. It's going to happen. Even if you build this auth stuff today, in 3 months or 6 months, we might have to pivot off of that provider.
Right.
Rubber Duck's a good example. We were using Twilio Go for the video.
Hmm.
Well, we may have to pivot off of that at some point. And the
Right.
way that we've designed it, or the things that I did when I was building it, or the majority of it, says, hey, we can easily pivot off of this. Or at least that's the goal and that's the hope, and I'm not tied to it. Um, so when I'm reviewing your code, when you're reviewing my code, the main thing is observability, visibility, that you understand that we have this mutual understanding of where we're going. Like based on what we've talked about on those weekly meetings, is does this align to what we talked about where we want to go?
Right.
And then continue. And guess what? If it doesn't work, we simply submit a change and we change the code, and we move along, right? It also has to go with like atomic commits.
Yeah.
If you're, I want to just call this out, and you do a great job at like really small changes. And based on some of the changes that I've had in the last week or two, that I don't always do a good job. Sometimes I just want to do the next thing and the next thing, and I throw it all together. But you make it really easy to just approve the changes, right? Because I can review 3 or 4 changes, and the changes are really small. I know what's happening. It's very obvious. And it's a no-brainer that this change can be reverted if it needs to be, etc. And again, I'm not always good at that, because sometimes I just want to shove it all in and say, you know what, we'll fix it. We'll fix it when we need to.
Well, but that has something to do with flow state too, right? Because you get
Yeah.
in this flow state and you fix this and then you fix that and you fix that. And so, like, I mean, one thing to call out here is, I think, well, maybe two things. First of all, not everybody's flow state looks the same. And the second is that we're not always all like, we're definitely not always in a flow state, and we might not be in the flow state at the same time. Two things there to call out. But like, to me, like that change paradigm, right? Where I say that people tend to submit pull requests at the level of their trust in their work. I think that's really key, because folks that submit really large pull requests, and sometimes, or even moderately sized pull requests, are people that trust their work a lot. And that's okay. That's the level of trust that we have. And when an entire organization has that level of trust, or has the guardrails in place to facilitate that kind of trust, that can be amazing. The atomic commits thing, I have a strong bias towards the atomic commits. I've taught this at every level, every organization I've been in. I really push it. I really believe that it facilitates, continuous delivery, small changes that can be easily reverted. But a part of it is that when I first started out, I just didn't trust my work. And so I would commit at the pace at which I tested. So every time I would go and test something and make sure it worked, I'd commit right then. And that's just been something that I've done ever since then. And then what ends up happening is I got so far removed from code bases that I couldn't go in and refactor the whole thing. I didn't have enough domain knowledge to do it anymore. And transparently, I was getting into messier and messier code bases. And so I had to go in and find what's the little sliver that I can be successful at in this fixed amount of time. And that's really hung with me. And so, but I do think that it facilitates really easy reviews. And like you said, but I did want to call out, everybody's flow state looks a little different. And when you have folks like yourself, sometimes that you'll fix this and that will tip over the next domino, the next win. And the flow state can be broken if you're oh, well, now I got to commit and push a branch and spin a PR, especially if, coming back to what you were talking about, especially if that PR is going to halt progress because either one, it implies or your organization is built strongly around a long delay on those feedback cycles, or if those feedback cycles don't allow you to tip the domino over. And so like I can see a place where like those kinds of big changes become like sort of the habit. I think that that's a dangerous place to be because those bigger changes are inherently more risky.
Yep.
But I do want to call out that they're implied by like everybody's naturally going to work in the way that they work the fastest. And so like the organization's responsibility, in our case, our responsibility, because we're a team, is to facilitate that. And so like if I want smaller PRs, I have to facilitate rapid feedback and feedback that facilitates knocking over the next domino. And I think you called it out. You said we have as a core principle that we design and build for change. And that's the really, really important part of how stressful a PR is. We've talked a lot about artificial stress versus real stress. And like the amount of rigor that goes into a change set, a PR, is directly correlated to how changeable it is later. And when stuff is really easy to change, like rubber duck's a great example. Rubber duck is built to be very modular, very, very fluid, very, very changeable. When it's built to be changed, like I don't stress the small stuff anymore because like it's like, oh, well, we can just change that later, right? Because it's easy to do and it's not like going to take a lot of effort. And so we can just work through those and they become another set of really small dominoes to knock over.
Yeah, I love the whole domino analogy. That's what that's what we want, is that you can knock over a domino and it'll knock over the next. You don't want to have big hurdles that you've got to um, overcome before you can get to the next one. And I think this is like terminology that we've seen at other companies. They'll often refer to them as like big rocks. We want
Yeah.
to move these big rocks. They're really heavy, take a lot of effort, lots of engineers, lots of planning, and ultimately it forces you to move slow. And there's real value in being able to move fast. And I don't mean like breakneck speed to where you drive to burnout really fast. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the ability to have a feature in mind, right? You just get this light bulb, hey, I want to add this feature. And it doesn't require hardly any lift because the way you built modular, you built for change,
Yeah.
and you can try it. You can do some A/B testing, or you can just give it to everybody. And if people don't like it, you revert it because that's the way you've built, right?
Yeah.
And so I don't like necessarily. I know I've been guilty of it in the past. I'll sometimes mention like big rocks or milestones and stuff like that. Some of the auth stuff I would consider like a milestone. That's really important to facilitating the next work and having more folks work with us. It's really important. But at the same time, like the work that you're doing, the work that I'm doing, when it does come in, you want it to facilitate knocking down the next domino really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And if you say, hold on, I've got to review this for about a week or whatever it is. We're both busy. We've got lives,
Right.
you've got your children, I got my family, we're both busy. And our goal is to
Day
not,
jobs.
exactly, our goal is not to be here 80 hours a week or even 60 or truth be told, even 40 when this thing becomes our permanent, full-time job.
Yeah.
But if I can support you, because that's what it comes back to is, and I'm going to use what you said here. Everybody's flow state is different, and then everybody is at a different point in that ebb and flow, right? So our cycles are completely off.
Yeah.
You've been in this massive flow state for like the last week, and it's awesome to see. And I haven't been flowing so much in the last week, but you saw that before that, right? Like last week,
Right.
I had my energy was going. I wanted to do this, and so what I ask of you and of the team is facilitate that flow state for me. Help me maintain it as long as I can. And then when I'm done, guess what? I'm gonna go into that off cycle. And if you so happen to be in the flow state, then my goal is to support you as much as I can. I don't want to stop you. I don't want to become the bottleneck. I want to facilitate that. Sometimes it's a simple question. Can we do this later? How does this tie us down? And then we come back to like guiding principles as opposed to opinions. I don't want to
Yeah.
drop my opinions. I don't even want to nitpick. I don't even want to use nit in our PRs. I simply want to refer to guiding principles. Does this make us more secure? Does this make us less secure?
Yeah.
Does this make us less accessible? Does this, increase our technical debt if we're going to use that term. I want guiding principles. I don't want opinions. I don't want biases, right? Because we all have them,
Right.
even if they're just like subconscious, we inject them a lot of times. And our goal is to like build stuff into, let's not forget the having fun part. Like code
Yeah.
should be fun. Like I like writing code when I'm excited about it. Like I really enjoy writing code. And one of the worst things that can happen is is if you have somebody else come in here and like pee in my Cheerios, if you will.
Yeah.
I'm over here enjoying this bowl of Cheerios, my code, and somebody comes in and they pee all over them. It's almost one of the most frustrating feelings there is, and I think it's something that we're really hopefully we can be aware of as we go forward. Um, is facilitating ebb and flow and just being a supporter of somebody else's flow state.
Yeah, I think this is really great, and I'm hoping not to I'm not pivoting the conversation too early, but like you started to talk a little bit about the ebb state, and I want to maybe start to talk a little bit about that too. I am watching the time a little bit more than I typically do because, as you know, I have a hard stop. But
Yep.
before I get there, one of the things that I want to talk about flow state, you kind of hit on it, is like, there's been lots of PRs lately, and it is a little bit of a, I mean, for me, a little bit of a like a Stella got her groove back moment, because like I don't do a lot of coding anymore, that. And then like I had this opportunity to like do this one little thing, and I was like, oh, that was fun. And then it was approved, and I was like, cool, I can just move on right to the next thing. And so it like feeds itself. And so in a way, like what you haven't said here is that, but can be properly concluded, is that before that I was kind of in an ebb state where my contributions hadn't been very heavy. I was doing more like coaching, guiding, and a little bit of like visioning and writing lots and lots of tickets. But I got this one PR out there. I was like, oh, I'll do this one. I got to fix this one thing, and got my win in. But it was like a small fix and a faster like feedback cycle. And I was like, okay, well, I can fix one more thing. I don't, the boys are already in bed, whatever. Let me just fix this other thing. And it builds on itself. And so like part of this that I want to talk about is, one, bringing people out of that ebb state. That's really, really important because, well, I mean, first I want to highlight that it is okay to be in an ebb state. Like, and that's something that Anvil is entirely built around. We spent a whole podcast on that last time. And the idea that like you can hand off your oar, like here, like we want the boat to go faster. And sometimes the boat goes faster if one person rests and the other person rows. That's how it works. And so it's okay to be in an ebb state, and we want to recognize that and support that and facilitate it. Like there's this old quote that I really love. That's like, sometimes your 100% for the day is 50%. And that's a-okay. Sometimes the best you can give is half of what you got, because like you're tired. I mean, you've probably done it. I've definitely done it. I have small kids. You wake up, you didn't get enough sleep the night before. You're kind of tired, and you maybe spend like the first couple of hours like staring at your screen and sipping coffee and trying to feel productive without actually having to be productive. And like that's the
Yep.
best you can do. That's the best you can do. And that's okay. So I want to start by saying that it's okay to be in an ebb state. As an organization, when people are trying to ramp back up or gear back up or refine their groove, we want to facilitate that. And so I kind of want to talk a little bit about how you see that, because I absolutely agree that it's our job as a team. There's three of us to support each other in whatever our state is. So I'd love to hear, like, you were in this amazing flow state. You fixed Rubber Duck. We didn't even say it yet on the podcast, but we released an entirely new main site.
That's right.
Y'all, you did a lot of work there. Awesome work. Um, and then you kind of have cooled off, and you did a bunch of work on YouTube too. We also have not mentioned that we have
That's
I
true.
mean, some folks are probably watching this on YouTube right now. Because you did some work there. Now you've kind of cooled off for about a week, and that's okay. But if you were thinking like, all right, I want to get back in, like, let's talk a little bit about that, like getting back into it.
Yeah, I think first of all, it's important to breathe, like to breathe and to like recover. So um,
Oh yeah.
imagine you went to the gym and you worked out really hard. You might need 2 days to recover, and it's really similar with like this type of work that we're doing. And like what you mentioned earlier was sometimes it's not writing code, sometimes it's visioning. And I never thought I would have said that in the past, but visioning, and we'll talk about that on another episode, is its own set of work, right? Documentation is
Mm-hmm.
work, whether you believe it or not.
Hard too. That's the
Content
hard work.
creation, yeah, content creation is not easy. So anybody who like is out there and does content creation full time, props to you because it's not easy. Not anybody can do it. And I'm still kind of learning and crawling, if you will.
Yeah.
So you're doing all this work. It's not just code, right? And like and I'll acknowledge that too. Like when you're doing work, there's times when you're not writing code, but maybe you're writing tickets. Maybe you're doing other stuff, doing research. Research is work too.
Mm-hmm.
And there's all this that goes on. And what happens is it ends up taxing your body and your mind. Even though like we're not necessarily like cutting down trees for a living or digging holes, it still taxes your mind and in turn can also tax your body.
Yeah.
And so you need a break from those things, just like if you had gone to the gym or worked a full day outside, like as a landscaper, you need, you absolutely need a break. And sometimes that means, becoming like that supporting role, just being an ear,
Mm-hmm.
just tell me what you're working on. And maybe I don't have any feedback for you, but I'm just going to be an ear. And that's what I'm going to do. And I'm in like my recovery period. I'm just kind of like stretching or whatever. Um, and then what happens is you start to feel rested. Your mind starts to be cleared. You kind of have that creative energy again, and you say, all right, I'm ready to get back into the next thing.
Yeah.
And so it's important at that point, right? So first of all, you don't want to just go, 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 go. Even if we're like, there's times where I'm like so excited about the stuff that we're building that I want to go, 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 go. And I'll hit like this wall and I'm just like, I'll put it away. I'll
Mm-hmm.
put it away for a week, sometimes 2 weeks. There's been times where I haven't touched stuff. I mean, the bug and rubber duck sat there for like 7 or 8 months,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? I just put it on the back burner, didn't think about it because you need that recovery, and the team has to just facilitate it. Um, like I think I can say this for all engineers out there, for anybody who writes software. Sure, we might be online for like 40 hours a week, but we do not give you 40 hours a week worth of work because it's impossible. It's impossible for me to like give you, like you mentioned, 50% might be your 100% for that day. That might be
Yeah.
enough. Um, and we have to acknowledge that. And it's the same thing with anybody that we bring on. They're not going to give us 40 hours, and I don't want them to.
Right.
I, I want them to give me their best when they feel their best.
Yeah.
Sometimes for me, it's Saturday morning. Like I love working
Yeah, you
Saturday
do.
morning. Sometimes I'll get up and I'll I'll edit the podcast on Saturday morning. I'll have my coffee, and again, that's work, but I'm
Yeah.
enjoying it. I'm in this creative mode, and that's what I'm doing. Or I'm building something. Maybe I'm building something brand new. Maybe I'm adding a feature to something. And ultimately, like, first of all, I have to feel ready. I have to feel
Yeah.
ready to get back in because if I don't feel my best, there's no way that I'm giving you my best. And so, um, as an organization, the one that we're building, you know, being open about this, being supportive, and just straight up acknowledging. Like I know in the past, I've told people straight up, "Man, you look like you're burnt out.
Mm-hmm.
Are you okay? Why don't you just
Yeah.
go watch a couple videos? Go watch a couple videos on like I don't know, like non-important stuff.
Yeah.
Um, breathe, right? Don't be like mentally engaged. Um, I know I skirted the question completely, but yeah, when you come back and when you feel ready, talk to the team. Hey, what are our priorities? Because in that week or 2 weeks or a month, priorities may have shifted, and especially when you're building stuff like we are, priorities are constantly shifting.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a couple of really great call outs to make there. Is like, first of all, like when you're in the ebb state, like if you're ebbed, that's okay. One really important thing you called out that like as an organization, we have to be okay to let people come down because like there's two versions of like recovery needed, right? Like you think about like the gym, you use the gym example. I love that. There's the recovery where you can't go to the gym. Like you don't need to go to the gym or you can't go to the gym because you're just too tired. There's also the recovery where you like can't get out of bed. And that's not recovery. That's injury. And like we don't want as an organization to get folks to the place, ourselves to the place where it's not only I can't do this work, but I can't do anything. That's burnout. That's bad. We don't want to be there. So one is noting that like, hey, I just need to step away from this a little bit. I'll tell you that when I was at USA, I used to like on some days, like after we'd all gone to work from home, like on my lunch break, I would just go outside and lift up the trees at lunch, just go and chop branches on the trees. Um, because like it got me out of that headspace. It gave me a space to do something else. And so that's key. Do something else if you're in that ebb state pace. The other one is like, hopefully we've, as an organization, supported the idea of getting out of that flow state sufficiently that nobody is in the, I just need to lay in bed for a few days. Because the other thing that you talked about is like, how do we support our peers? We're a group of people, a team of people who some of us are still going to the gym. So like, you don't have to go to the gym, but maybe you can drive everybody else there. You know, keep them moving, keep them going to the gym, keep them motivated. And that's a super useful thing to do while you're kind of step back, like, oh, I don't want to look at this code. I don't need to write any code. Like, let me keep an idea of what the changes are. And those two things are really important to me. And so like, I think about like, how do you come back in? And you talk about talking to the team. One is that like making sure you understand the changes. You mentioned that changes in priority, changes in the code base. But one of the things that we talked about all the way back at the beginning of the podcast, so those atomic changes and modularity of the code base, this is really, really important. We on our podcast have talked a lot about caring about the customer and a bunch of other things, not having strong opinions. And what you might hear from that, if like you're a listener, you might hear like, we don't have any code rigor. And I actually think that would be the wrong impression to take away, because I think a lot of what we're talking about is only accomplishable if we have good coding practices, like that modularity, that building sideways, that not having things that are too dependent, like understanding that change is coming. Because the other thing that I think about is, and this is true if you're coming out of an ebb state, or if you're brand new to an organization. We've all been in this place where you're like brand new to an organization and they're like, okay, well, you need to acclimate yourself to the code base. And you open it up. And a thing happens. Either you're like, oh, this code base is easy to read and I know exactly what's going on. Or you just starting opening files at random because nothing really makes any sense.
Yep.
And like, if you have that second code base, it is much harder to get out of the ebb state and back into the flow state, because one, you need an easy win, and an easy win is looking and seeing what changed. And we need to like facilitate like not having that angst or anxiety about looking at this code base. Like, we need to avoid that. So a clean code base really does facilitate that. And because a lot of times, like if stuff's moving quickly, 15 PRs in a week from one person, like, the code base is going to look a lot different, but it needs to still look just as clean, so that you can kind of understand that. And then the other thing is clear visioning. We've talked a lot about visioning in this podcast. We're going to have to talk about it a whole second podcast probably, but like clear vision for what the direction is, and not just direction, like, oh, not just we're going there, but what are the stops along the way? Like the great thing about, like, I don't know if you remember this, but like way back in the day, we're old, Rand McNally atlases. You were going to go on a trip, you would buy this big old map, and you would have two things. You would have point A, where I am, and point B, and you would draw a line across the map for where you're supposed to go. There was no exit number, yada, yada, yada. There was no, turn left, drive for a quarter mile. It was like, here's the rough idea of what I'm doing.
Yep.
That's it. That's what you had. And if you got lost, you kind of pulled off to the side and got into a convenience store and asked for directions. We have been blessed with, Google Maps and the like now that give you like step-by-step, turn-by-turn directions. That's what vision needs to be to acclimate getting back in. Not, well, what we're working towards. But okay, knowing that we need to work towards that, that's the now priority. What's the next turn to make? And can I help us make that turn? Because that will help you get back into the code base. That's my thought anyway. It's like, that's what made it easy for me to get back into this, is that we had a clear vision of where we wanted to go. And then we knew, like, we had a bunch of like discrete steps that had already been laid out. So I could just do, that's the dominoes, right? Turn left, turn right, go a quarter mile.
Yeah, and what's nice about that is having a bunch of those discrete steps is that if you get halfway through or some arbitrary stop, and we've decided to, shift just a little bit, then you can also shift.
Yeah.
Right. When you're dealing with like a waterfall approach, or we're going to deliver everything in one big chunk at the end.
Yeah.
It means that the vision has to stay the same, and in how quickly things move today, how quickly things change, that's not always like the best thing. Again, just an opinion here. It's not always the best thing. Sometimes that works. But sometimes you get to the end, and the end could be months. I'm talking about like a year. There's some
Hmm.
contracts that are like, oh, we have this contract for 18 months. And especially like if you're in a consulting firm, you're like, we're going to deliver this thing in 18 months. And at the end of this, here's the designs, here's all the technical specs, and they don't expect it to change at all. Right. And this is the thing we're going to deliver at the end. And if there's changes, then it requires massive
Yeah.
rework, right? Massive redesign. Um, but by doing things the way we're doing, right, planning for change, it means that everything's small. And if we get to next Wednesday and then we say, hey, you know what? That thing we talked about, that part of the vision, it doesn't really work anymore.
Yeah.
Well, I don't feel so strongly about it. And here's why. And we agree to kind of pivot. Well, you haven't like sunk all this time in something because you've planned for change, right? And just knowing
Right.
that it's going to happen, just accept it. It's going to change. Be ready for it. Um, when you're in the military, you do a lot of like hurry up and wait,
Yeah.
right? It's like everybody get ready, get all your stuff on, and then we're gonna go sit here and we're gonna hurry up and wait. Um, and then you do it again, you do it over and over and over again. And ultimately they do it a lot because they want you to be ready to move on a moment's notice, right?
Yep.
Like it's sometimes, where you are, like I was never more than like a specialist, but down here at my super low rank, it's easy to question what are the folks doing up here? But ultimately what they're doing is they're preparing you mentally for when we really have to move really fast.
Right.
And I'll kind of do the same things with my kids. I'll tell them, hurry, let's go, let's get in the car, let's go. And I'll tell them, well, what if one day there's a fire? We have to hurry up and get out of the house. Are you going to be taking your time to get your shoes on? We have to prepare now for that time. And so it's the same thing with us, right? Is you have to prepare and you have to get used to pivoting. You have to get used to change. Because if you're not, then it's going to be this big wake up call. Oh,
Yeah.
crap. We sunk all our eggs in this basket. We laid down this road. We can't pivot. And nobody wants the thing that we're building anymore.
Yeah.
Right. So like sunk costs and all that good stuff. Um, but I'm kind of like really interested in conferences. I'm really interested in that space. And there's a video or a set of videos that I've been watching by Nicholas Means. Um,
Okay.
you know him.
Hmm.
He has a bunch of videos and he has a couple on lead dev that are really just really awesome. I love his storytelling approach. And he talks about skunkworks.
Hmm.
And anybody can go look this up. I'll probably put it in the show notes, the link to his video. He explains it really awesome. And it's the idea that um, there was this really small team, what you might consider an agile team today, really
Hmm.
small group of engineers. These were like mechanical engineers and like physicists and all that good stuff. And they were building airplanes or aircraft. And um, Kelly, I can't remember his last name, but they were able to accomplish this because they were so small. They didn't do all of this planning.
Right.
They didn't have like this organization that we had to every time something changed, they had to send it up the ladder. They could make the changes at their level.
Right.
They could light bulb goes off. They could draw it up on a piece of paper, and they could manufacture the part on the spot. And they were able to accomplish some really awesome things that the rest of the organization wasn't because the rest of the organization was so weighed down by process,
Yeah.
right? They were on this long journey. Um, I think about change like this. I know we're talking about ebb and flow, but I think about change like this. Um, as organizations get bigger and bigger, basically the ship that you're all on gets bigger and bigger. A large ship is incredibly difficult to turn. It can't turn on a dime.
Yeah.
Like a smaller ship, like a smaller dinghy or a little wave. Imagine you're on a wave runner. If you want to pivot because you don't no longer want to go this direction, it doesn't take much. It doesn't take much effort for you to all of a sudden be going in a different direction.
Right.
But when these organizations get real big and they put everybody in one boat, right? Everybody in one big ship, and they say we all turn together, that can actually, be a problem. And it's
Yeah.
something that I want to be mindful of. And one of the reasons that I think smaller is better, being ready to pivot, ready to change, ready to support, ebb and flow states. There's there's times where all of a sudden an idea pops in my head and I'm like, I want to go build this thing.
Yeah.
And what's really cool is all the work that you've done, and I'm gonna, give you a lot of credit here. A lot of the work that you've done ahead of time, facilitates my creativity in that space. I can go and buy a domain because we need another domain. We don't have
Yeah.
enough, right? I can go and buy a domain. I can do the DNS configuration. I can do all the work on the front end, get it live probably like in 30 minutes. I mean, it's like so quick turnaround. And I can have this thing super live. Honestly, faster than that if I wanted to. But it facilitates my flow state, right? That's ultimately what's important.
And I think there's a lot here. Like it's interesting that we've kind of started to talk about change, because I do think those two things are very tied together. One, because flow state, it's easier to get into a flow state if you're starting something new. I think that's really kind of where we got to with this, is like when you're starting something new, it's easy to like jump back in because it's new. It's new again. And we love new stuff. We're like that. We are horizon scanners as a species. We are horizon scanners. And so we're always looking for the new thing, the next
Yep.
horizon. And like, I think that's important because like you started by talking about like, don't let stuff run for a long time. And like the idea is there that I take away from that, and we've talked about this, is build it small enough to finish. Make it small enough to finish, to be able to cut it and say, okay, this is done, we're moving on. I think this is a big key to like project management. If you're a project manager out there, ask yourself, when is it done? There's this famous quote by like Mark Zuckerberg, or is it Mark? I don't know his name anymore.
Right.
Like
They just
where
call
he
them
talked
Zuck
about
these days.
Zuck, like when way back in the early days of Facebook, and he was like, Facebook is like fashion, it's never finished. And I mean, I understand the intent behind that quote, but I think that there is a way to say this is done. And as a project, like when you're managing a project, you almost want to know, when is this done? When can I say it's done? One, because it allows me to move on to the next thing, to refresh my team. But two, also because like if it's never done, everybody's going to get bored. On a long enough time frame, everybody gets bored. And so that's one thing that I think about. And then like as you talked about like waves and boats, I sort of want to call out two things here, because I thought it was really interesting that you were talking about this. First of all, because it naturally ties to the idea of ebb and flow, because of waves and tides, right? Nobody wants to ride on a choppy ocean where the ebbs and flows are constant, right? Like that's a sea that nobody wants to be on. And so like you want to have it to where the where you have a decent wave, right? Like that like, oh, my waves, like my ebb and flow state is maybe 2 weeks, 1 week, 1 week, 2 weeks, something like that. But the other thing that really stood out to me is one of the questions that I'll ask when I'm doing interviews is like, how do waves travel in your organization? And this is kind of the same thing that you're talking about around change, is like if you take a rock and you throw it in a pond, the waves travel out. And if it's a really, really big pond, they take forever. But you don't want waves traveling like a pond or a river or an ocean in the middle of a storm where everything is all choppy. You don't want it like that. But you also don't want it to where like you have built these buoys in place to smooth it out, so there are places where the waves don't travel at all. And I think that's when we think about like the ability to change an organization. That's the other way to think about that. It's not as a big boat, but where the organization has been buoyed by process that prevents waves from traveling and prevents change from happening, and like prevents ebbs and flows. And those things are all sort of bad. I will not, I guess like bad's maybe that's a very opinionated way to say that.
Yeah.
But like I think that they can, I mean, we all know what happens to water when it sits.
Yeah.
And so like, and the same is true of humans. Like there's a reason for an ebb and a flow. It's like you need that refresh. You need that refresh. You need change. You need waves, because that's a part of what makes us ebb and flow. And the sort of like the last tie to that is I think that there is a secondary way to organize an organization that we tend not to think about because we're so used to like adding Lego bricks, right? We just build it bigger. You even kind of mentioned this at the beginning, even with our code, we build on top of it. But like you and I both talked about this idea of building sideways. And there's lots of room for this, right? Like, so like you have a little boat and you have people in it. And when you have more people than fit in the boat, you can either build a bigger boat or you can get a second one.
Yep.
And then the third one, and then a fourth one. And you scale sideways. You build more you build more boats instead of building a single larger boat. And that's, I think, really at the core of the way we're building Anvil, is that we just continue to build sideways and add more boats as opposed to
Yeah.
continuing to grow the boat.
And the best part about that is if one boat gets a hole in it, you just let it sink and you get the people
Exactly.
in another boat or something. Yeah,
Right.
when you've got one and it sinks, everybody sinks.